Welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I want to introduce today our guest, Scott Paton. Scott Paton was introduced to me by our good friend Mark Mawhinney. Now, Mark was a previous guest on the Cool Grandpa Podcast and had introduced me to Scott while Scott was in transit going from Florida all the way down to Colombia. I was fortunate enough to meet Scott in person in Atlanta, where we were able to spend an hour or so just getting to know each other prior to our interview. One of the things that you're going to love about Scott is that he's built up this business where he's able to be location independent, meaning he can go to Colombia and spend 6 months, and then he can go off to Africa and spend another 6 months. Through his travels, he's normally gone about 9 months out of the year and then back home for about 3. During this time, he's been able to grow and maintain relationships with his granddaughter and grandson. You're in for a treat on how he's been able to create this lifestyle and then grow that relationship between a grandfather and his grandchildren. Now, one of the things I'll just give you a little bit of a heads up on, I did have some technical difficulties with the sound and the recording, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that, maybe it's not up to the same level as what you have heard on previous podcasts. So without any further ado, let's dive into this conversation. So grab those running shoes and get them laced up if you're going out for a walk, or grab that beverage and pull up a chair so that you can join me and Scott in having a great conversation about being a cool grandpa. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Thank you, Scott, for taking time out of your travel schedule to sit down with me and be on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I do appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule.
Hey, Greg, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. It's kind of exciting. This is the first time I've been interviewed as a grandpa.
Yeah. It's always fun when you get a couple of grandpas together to swap some stories and experiences and learn from each other, too.
It sure is. It sure is.
I'm sorry. One of the questions I love to ask grandpas when we have you on the show is, what was your reaction and experience like when you first heard the news that you were going to be a grandfather for the first time?
Wow, that's a really good question. I wasn't in the country when they found out that they were going to have a baby. So it was kind of a long distance announcement. And it was kind of like, oh, that's great. I really can't think of anything much more than that. I mean, I was just really happy that my son had found a wonderful woman that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. And she had already, from another relationship, had a daughter, and the daughter and my son got along great. She gets along, my step granddaughter gets along great with me as well. And so I don't think it really felt real. I was there in the hospital when he was born. And that to me was the most amazing part of the whole experience.
Yeah, that's an incredible experience. I had adopted my 2 sons, so I hadn't gone through that, but I know from being with my sister and her experience that is something that's definitely a life-changing moment.
Yeah, they're there, and then they go to the hospital, and then you're in the hospital pacing and everything else. And then the next time you see them, there's this little baby wrapped in a bundle in their arms. And it's just like, wow, that's so neat.
Yeah, it's incredible. And, one of the reasons I ask about everybody's reaction is because as grandfathers, we're all over the board with how we respond to it, because everybody's circumstances are a little bit different. I've had other people that have been way too young for this. Other people that are like, boy, I thought the kids would never have grandkids. And
that was more me. I wasn't sure he was ever going to get married, let alone have grandkids.
It's a great thing, too, that you've been able to also have that relationship with the stepdaughter and the step granddaughter. It's fantastic to be able to willingly just extend that love and that relationship. A lot of times too is that I think that becomes it's a different bond, but it's a strong bond at the same time.
It is. And the thing is, if you think about it, so basically they met when I was out of the country. He had bought a house. I'd helped him buy a house, and we basically packed everything up in the house we were in. I put it into into one of my stuff into one of his rooms, and then he changed and he moved to another house about a year or two after that, and I still hadn't been home. And so then he meets this amazing lady, and they get together, they're living together, and now they're having this child. And I haven't really had much interaction with any of them beforehand. And when I saw this new family, I thought, how can I support it in a way that's going to make everybody happy and also create more love? And so we're creating this family now, right? And I thought, oftentimes the child gets ignored, and gets ignored when there's this new baby, right? And I thought the thing I can do, because I was there about a month before, and then 2 or 3 months afterwards, I thought what I can do is just give that beautiful young girl all my love and attention, do fun things with them, and that will take the pressure off of my son and daughter-in-law, because they don't have to, they're focusing on this new baby that's coming in, and of course the daughter is always going to want that attention. But if I give her so much attention that they don't, they have their time, and not that she's not going to be around them, of course she's going to be around them, then and so I would take her out to the park, I'd take the dogs out for a walk, and did all these things. And of course Sarah just said, "Oh, he's so good with Chloe, it's just great," and it just caused everything to just flow really, really nicely. So I think sometimes our jobs as grandparents is to try to make life better for our grandkids and for our kids as they're growing into a new stage of their life. Like, no one has a book on how to be a dad or how to be a mom, and they're figuring all this out. And, to be honest, they're not really going to ask too much advice from us, right? And if you give advice, particularly if it's not wanted, then oftentimes that causes way more problems. So it's kind of like they have to make their own mistakes, they have to find their own way. But what I can do is I can give them a break from mommy from the older sibling, and also keep that child happy and engaged and enjoying what's going on. And so that was kind of my strategy, and it worked out fairly well, I think.
Oh, that's awesome. And it gives you time too to really bond with Chloe. And
yes, and that's really important. And as we travel now, we're on Messenger, and we'll chat and talk still, and keep that bond going. So it's really nice.
Yeah. Well, and it gives her another older person that knows that she knows that just loves her and wants the best for her, and can pour some let's say spoil her as well, but then also pour some wisdom into her as she's starting to grow.
Yeah, I think one of the things that grandparents, and I'm going to include aunts and uncles, can do that's very difficult for parents to do, is to give a single child in the family, and assuming there's more than one, their 100% attention. And I think that's something that just happens so rarely, where someone sits down and says, "I'm here, I'm giving you 100% of my attention. We can play a game, we can kick a ball, we can go run in the park, like whatever it is you want to do." And that's a really special time, I think, for me, and also for the grandchildren.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something that's been fairly common in some of these conversations that I've had, is that grandfathers talking about when they're grandfathers, they can now give that 100% attention, at a recital or whatever, because as fathers, a lot of times in our 20s and 30s and 40s, we're still thinking about careers. We're still thinking
Yep.
about the emails I need to send out after this, or the meeting that's coming up tomorrow. But I think there's something in becoming a grandfather and being a little bit at a different stage in life where we can block that out and say, you know what, the meeting coming up tomorrow is not a big deal. My granddaughter is a big deal, and it may just be sitting down and having an ice cream at the cafe and
Yep.
just listening to her talk about her friends.
You're right
you know,
on.
so it's an interesting perspective that we have. And then also too, I think it helps the parents when we can give a little bit of feedback to the parents about some of those conversations. And it's not a breaking of trust.
Right.
It's a little bit more of like, hey, I've heard, I'm going to use Chloe's name. I've heard Chloe's been having a tough time at school. Did you guys know about this? Or because as children start to get a little bit older, they pick up that parents may not be 100% focused on what's going on, and it's not a
Right.
parent's fault. It's just that's what comes with life.
Well, and I was thinking of it on a slightly different angle than what you brought up, which I think is a really good point, Greg. I was thinking it more in, you know, when you're having children, usually your late 20s, 30s, maybe 40s, you, like you said, you're working, you're focused on your career. And when you get home, you get up at 6, you get in 2 hours get to work, and then you work for 8 or 9 hours, 2 hours to get home. Like you're tired, right? So
Right.
you don't have that energy. You just want to like, I want to relax, right? And you don't necessarily have that time and energy to just really focus on one or more of the children. And typically as grandparents, we're a little further along on that. And but also when we're like, we don't normally live with our children and our grandchildren, so when we go over, we're like there, we don't have the home stuff, computers beeping or whatever to distract us either. And I think that really is important to the families. You can take that, yeah, you had a tough day, just relax, I'm going to take Chloe to the park for an hour. And it's like, oh great, I'm so happy you guys are doing that and have fun. And it's not only, oh great, I get to rest, but it's also, oh great, because I know how much Chloe loves spending that time out at the park.
Oh, sure. Well, and I'd also suggest to parents that might be listening to this is use those grandfathers and grandmothers, aunts and uncles that are in your life to do some of that activity, because we talk with our sons and our daughter-in-laws that, hey, when we come to visit, for us, it's a treat to put our grandson to bed or
Right.
watch our granddaughter. And, a lot of times we're telling them too is we'll watch the kids. You guys go to a movie or go,
Yeah,
just have dinner without a toddler there. Can sometimes be a real treat for parents as they're going through that phase.
it sure can be. Yeah.
So definitely, folks, take advantage of those grandpas and grandmothers in your lives when they can take over a little bit for you and give you a little bit of a break and do those things for you. Now, Scott, you've got a little bit of an unique and interesting lifestyle going on, let's say, where you're doing a lot of traveling, but then you're back in Canada for a few months out of the year. So you're both that grandfather that's very close by when you're back in Canada, and then you're also that world traveler that's all over. So how do you? Well, let's talk a little bit about how's the relationship when you're back on, let's say, back on site with the family and with the grandkids.
Well, I think everybody misses everybody. So you have that, there's a big difference in lifestyle between grandparents that are 2 blocks away and grandparents that are, 200 miles or 2,000 miles away. And it's kind of interesting because Chloe and Carson, that's my grandson's name, their other grandparents are I'm divorced, so one of them is 5,000 miles away, halfway across the country, and the other two are basically 2 blocks away. So they'll pop in anytime, or can you look after Carson for 5 minutes, right?
Right.
Drop him off, go do what they go, come back, and so it's really interesting to see that, because I've never had any grandparents who were actually in the city that I was raising my children, but. So there, I think in the beginning there's this, oh, like we've missed you and that sort of stuff, and then you also haven't, we always deposit and take money out of the emotional bank account, so I'll put it that way, and the bank account is kind of overloaded because there's been nothing taken out of it, right? Or it's been 9 months since I did something dumb, and all is forgiven. So you kind of come in, and you're right. Like, I stay very close to my family when I'm back in Canada, and it's kind of like, oh, well, we're doing this, we're doing that, and you just have to have that balance between too much and not enough when you're there, and give them, you want to give them space, but they also recognize that in a couple of months you're going to be gone again. So they want to take advantage of that. It's kind of like my grandparents were always about 500 miles away. So as I was growing up, so when they came for 2 weeks, and you had 2 weeks of grandma and grandpa in compressed time. And then in the summertime, I would go out see my aunts and uncles on the farm, and that's where grandma and grandpa were. So we'd have another 2 weeks of, and they were always wonderful, because you just didn't have time to, to get mad at the grandkids like you would at the ones that were there all the time, because I'm only there for a short period of time. So it was a fairy tale type of existence, I think.
Oh, very cool. And how's the relationship when you're on the road now with are you using a lot of the technology in the Zoom and messengers and different things to stay in touch with the kids?
Yeah, every couple weeks my sister organizes a family Zoom. So particularly since we've got, it's with the pandemic and COVID and everything else, it's almost like if you're a mile away, you're still far away. You can't tell the difference between me if I'm a mile away or if I'm 10,000 miles away, because nobody's getting together, or nobody was getting together last year. And so we use Zoom a lot, and then I use Facebook Messenger to keep in touch with Chloe. She's on it, and my son and daughter-in-law are both on it too, so we'll chat as well. But Chloe and I think we make a special effort to communicate and talk, because she'll be sitting there and she'll do some art thing, and then she'll send it off to me and show it to me, and we'll chat. It's really nice.
Oh, very cool. Now, have you done anything? I know some folks will do like kind of a stuffed animal or something that sometimes will go with the parents or with grandpas, and you take a picture of that on a monument or something that's kind of a traveling.
That's a great idea. No, I haven't done that.
Okay.
The way I am, I would probably leave it at the monument, have to get a new one, and I'd leave it at the next monument, have to get a new one. I seem to leave one or two things behind everywhere I go, and I don't know what I'm going to do about it, because I look, and then of course when I unpack, it's like, well, where is this? And then I get a hold of where I was, and they say, yeah, we've got it.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, and like I said, some people, I've known some people where it's like the family teddy bear,
right?
And they're taking a picture somewhere, but it's almost like a little wandering story of this teddy bear's adventures as well.
That's a great idea. I've never heard of that before. I just think that's awesome.
So are there things though with your travels, because you've been to Africa and Australia and all parts of Europe, where you're either bringing things back for Chloe and Carson, or how is that or are they even aware of all these travels and places, or is it just Grandpa's Carson, gone for a while and now he's right back?
Carson, he's a year and a half, so he doesn't have a clue, but it is funny because I was with him when he was born, and then I was with him on his first birthday and second Christmas, and which is, by the way, his birthday is 5 hours after my birthday ends. So I think he could have been a little bit earlier, but anyway. So when I first got to, of course, he wouldn't remember me from just being a newborn, and it was like the first 2 minutes he's holding on to daddy like, I don't know who this guy is. And of course Chloe comes running right up and gives me a big hug, and then he's like, oh, I guess he's all right. And then he didn't want to be with daddy anymore, he wanted to be with grandpa. So they're going through so many stages, and they're growing so fast that it's really kind of fun to watch it, because I'm seeing it like every year as opposed to every day, and it's just a huge difference. But I'll buy a couple souvenirs at different places that I'm at. But because I'm gone so long, I'm always cognizant of how heavy my luggage is.
Right.
And I don't get into the habit of shipping it home. So maybe I should.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I used to do with my kids was on business trips to different cities is pick up a university shirt from somewhere. So if I was in Boston, I'd pick up like an MIT shirt and a Harvard shirt and bring it back for the kids. But
right.
Something light and something small, and then something where they outgrow it, they tear it, whatever. It's not a big deal. It's not like
right.
A little statue. So how do you think having these grandkids has changed you?
The biggest change has been in legacy. A lot of people will talk about, what's your legacy? What's your legacy? And I could care less until I had a grandson. And then it was, oh, I'm sure his dad's going to take good care of him and everything else, but I want to leave some sort of legacy for Carson and Chloe, to be honest. So, now and it's funny, like, because when I left home, Jason moved out, I left the country. And, business was sort of like, get up, work a little bit, go see the Eiffel Tower, get home, work a little bit, go to bed, and when I say little bit, it's like not even an hour. Right. And then that was the lifestyle. And then things changed. And part of the change was having Carson, and all of a sudden the business is growing, very, a lot. And I'm thinking about how can I create, how can I create this so it becomes part of a legacy for my grandson, and something that he would be proud of. Right. And so I think of that, I often think of, when he's 20 and he's sitting at the coffee shop with me and he looks across and he says, Grandpa, why didn't you do, I'm going to be able to say, I did my best. Right. And it was difficult actually leaving, because, to be away from, my grandchildren for 9 months is not the easiest thing. But I thought about it and I said, would I want to have a grandpa that just sort of sat around, or would I like to have a grandpa that could tell me about trips that he made to the pyramids or to the Eiffel Tower or to Machu Picchu, that sort of thing? And I don't know what the answer is. Obviously, it could be like, I wish you didn't do that, Grandpa, and you were here when I was growing up. Or it could be, wow, that was really cool. You did all these things, and you're going to open up the world for me. Because when they're 20, to be able to say, hey, you want to go see Machu Picchu or something, it would be a thrill if they said, yeah, let's go, and we go spend a month and do something like that. It would just be wonderful. And so. And I never really thought about this before, Greg. So thank you. I'd love to be their tour guide to the world. When they hit their late teens and 20s, and just take them to a couple different places and show them things that they wouldn't have seen otherwise.
Oh, that's great. That's been something similar has been on my mind, where because I'm an old history buff, I remember these the old British Victorian families, and even before that, would do the grand tour of Europe, right? It would be,
right.
We're going to Italy, and we're going to go to Florence, and we're going to Milan, and we're going to Rome, and we're going to see the classic parts, to get that exposure. And thinking about doing, wondering about trying to set my life up so as my grandkids get older, doing very kind of the same thing, right? It may be Machu Picchu, or it may be going down to the Pampas in Argentina and
All right.
grasslands and the
Yeah.
cowboys down there.
Yeah.
Uh,
The
you
thing
know,
is too, is if you're taking them and you've been there and you're familiar with it, right? As opposed to taking them and, well, we need a tour guide, or you're taking them and nobody knows what they're doing, right? Like what I really like, I'm in Medellin, Colombia right now, and I really like that if I had one of my if Carson wanted to, I'm hoping to have more than two. I was going to say if one of my grandsons is what I was going to say, and I stopped myself. If they wanted to come and we could wander around Colombia. Well, I already know, like, these are the areas that I think you would really enjoy. And I think these are the sites, and here's the waterfalls and those sort of things. And as opposed to it being kind of we're going to discover it together. And of course, the world is big enough that if he said, hey, Grandpa, like, let's go someplace you haven't been and we'll explore it together. No problem. There's a million of those places too. But to be able to say, these areas and those areas and these areas I've been to, I've seen them, I know where to go, I know what to do, because I'm spending weeks and months in different places. So obviously I'm not going to cover even a fraction of the
sure.
cities that I could cover, but the ones that I'm really familiar with. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to be able to get a feel for what it was like to live in different cultures.
No, and I think that'll just enrich the grandkids as they're getting older and they can talk to you a little bit more, because we all remember those school projects where you get assigned, do a report on Argentina or Uruguay
Right.
or, South
Pull
Africa.
my fingernails out now, please. Get me out of my misery.
Right. But, to be able for them to go, hey, so Grandpa, you were here, right? What was the culture and everything really like? I've got a paragraph in a textbook, but,
Right.
tell me how everybody, eats a late dinner in Spain, or they do
Yeah.
different things, is going to be just really enriching for them, I think.
Actually, it's funny you say that, because I was in Mexico and talking to one of my friends, and I said, well, let's get together for lunch. He says, okay. And I said, oh, shoot, I got this and that. I said, I can't get together before 2:00. He says, well, 2:00 is lunchtime.
Yeah, and it's interesting to know. I mean, even as simple as when meals happen
Yeah.
in different cultures, and certainly in Mexico and other parts of the world, it's a little bit of it'll happen when it happens kind of thing. Like I think in North America we're very much used to. I said 12:30 and it's 12:30 and here we are. And then other places it's like, yeah, we said 12:30, but it's 1:00, 1:30, and now I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Manana.
so with all the travels and everything that you're doing and keeping up with Chloe on Facebook Messenger and on the Zoom calls, do you think that that's really maintaining that closeness? So when you step back into being back in Canada, you guys are right there and everything's picked up? Or do you think that even with the technology, there's still some catching up and some distance there?
I think it might change over time from when I first met her a year and a half ago to, close to a year and a half ago to now. How would that work? Like 2 years ago till 4 months ago. Like, so there was a kind of this year missing. There was no difference. It was like, oh, I'm happy to see you, and let's go to the park and let's do all the things. Now, when you become teenagers and everything else, like, it's a whole different kettle of fish. So who knows? I'm hoping it'll be, well, that's my grandpa who travels the world, and he just got back from Bolivia, and he brought me this straw hat. I'm hoping that'll be the story that comes out.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And because I'm always curious with the way things have moved with technology. Like you and I definitely grew up in probably more of an analog world, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was phone calls, letters, maybe postcards, and
lots of postcards. And now with the technology,
yeah, we can see each other and we can interact with the kids, but I wonder if there's maybe something missing with the ease of that communication to an extent, as far as the intimacy of it.
Right. I think it's probably more intimate because we can see and we can interact. But I mean, when you think about it, you get a handwritten postcard like, "I'm glad they thought of me," but there's no two-way interaction, and there's not a huge bunch of one-way interactions. So um, as long as you're not a block away and or in the same room and texting each other, right? I mean, sometimes people do it as a joke, but if you're in the same room, like hopefully you're talking to each other and interacting.
Oh, absolutely. So in my grandson's just now starting to get to where he really is picking up. He's almost 3, to where he's picking up on when we do FaceTime and when we do these video chats, and getting to a point where he's, hey, I want to talk to grandpa, or I want to talk to grandma. And
Oh yeah.
it's been interesting to see how young the kids are in knowing the technology and knowing that I can call up and look at grandpa.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
They're totally into it. And I hope that isn't a problem, right? Because it's one thing to be totally like, I want to talk to grandma and grandpa. That's like awesome. But I want to play this game and I don't want to do anything else is not, right? So you've kind of
right.
got the light side and the dark side. And I worry about that because how you interact if you're growing up playing with cartoon characters in some video game, is a lot different than if you're heading out to the park with grandma and grandpa and going on the swings.
Exactly. Or if the child and grandkids preference then starts to becoming the default with the using the technology versus the one-on-one interaction or the human interaction,
Right.
Going down to the park, or going on a fishing trip or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Got to get the kids out into nature. So important, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And that's one of the big things too that you can see, and I think grandparents can use to get away from those technology and those tablets and some of those things. It's some of the hiking and the fishing and being out, where
Right.
kids have to use their hands and they have to be looking up and aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
It's not the same as, let's go for a drive. Well, with a drive, the kids can sit in the back seat and be on the devices, but
Right.
getting out in nature, it's, and there's things that they want to see that, you only see by being there.
Yeah. That's right. Well, there's nothing like, being by a waterfall. Watching a video of a waterfall is nowhere near as good.
No. And I think that's also one of the cool things that will probably happen as the grandkids get old enough to travel with you, is all these different travels that you've had, is knowing where those waterfalls are. I mean,
Yes.
it's great to go tour around the different cities, but with your experiences of being, oh, let me go show you this little trail and this waterfall that you don't see it on the tour guide
Right. Right.
thing.
I'm already thinking of 4 waterfalls. Nobody knows where they are except the locals and me.
Right, right. No, and that's going to be an awesome experience.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward. My sons at every age I thought were absolutely amazing and incredibly fun. And I'm totally expecting my grandkids to be exactly the same.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things too with grandfathers, is that we can, because we've been through that parenthood part of it, we know what those development stages and personality stages can be. We know that 3 years old can be a little bit more rough than 2 years old.
Right.
And then we know that there's periods where it's like, oh, from this age to this age, the kids are going to be really sweet and really attentive. And then when they hit this age, they're not going to want anything to do with anybody, and they're going to be even more self-centered and everything else, which is just a part of growing up. But
Right. Right.
as a parent, you don't necessarily know it, or you don't believe it until you've gone through it. And then as a grandparent, you can sit back and go, yeah, this next couple of years is going to be rough for you guys.
Yeah.
And as a grandparent, you can swoop in, have your quality time, and then, step back away from that a little bit.
Right. You reminded me of once when my son was he was 7 years old and he was having a temper tantrum. And I looked at him and I said, son, you're acting like a 7-year-old. And he stopped and he thought about it, and he wrinkled his brow and he says, Dad, I am a 7-year-old. And I says, I know. This is how 7-year-olds act. And that was a perfect pattern interrupt, because he couldn't be mad and upset anymore because he was off on another thought process. And but kids are kids. Then the ages they are the ages they are.
Well, and that's one reason too, as grandfathers, you can be a little wily like a fox, is because you can do just like you said with your son, is you can throw a little monkey wrench into a tantrum, or what the next shiny object is to distract them from something that they want.
Right.
Well, now what are some of the things that we've talked about the legacy and some of the travel, and what are some of the things that are coming up with the kids that you're looking forward to?
Well, with Carson, having him learn to, speak and talk, I'm looking forward to that. And with Chloe, just and watching her grow, really. And she's, I think she's 7 now, and I'm looking forward to seeing her, turn into a teenager, turn into a young woman, turn into a mom, the next 30 years.
Right. No, that's great. And it's interesting too, I think, where we get to a point where you had talked about starting to think about legacy, and we talked about trips that we want to take and things we want to do, is even now thinking about myself, hey, taking a little bit better care of myself, making sure you get those doctor's appointments and things like that, because wanting to be there when the kids are getting married now, or the grandkids are getting married. And, a few years before they showed up, it was like, who knows what's going to happen. But once they show up and they come into our lives, it's a little bit of, oh, okay, I want to be around and see their teenage years. I want to see their baseball games. I want to see some of these things. Now,
yeah, to see them not be able to walk, then to walk, and then to run, and then to play like baseball or something is awesome.
So what advice would you have for grandfathers, or new grandfathers that are trying to figure this thing out as well? What are some things that you've learned over the last couple of years?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to be really aware of what's going on with the parents and any other children that are around. And then you can be part of the problem or you can be part of the solution, right? So if you go in and you're saying, well, son, this is how you should do it, you're going to have a lot more problems than if you just see what needs to be done and help them out, right? Like it could be as easy as, the dishes need to be washed. So go look after that's one of the things I do. I'm always filling up or emptying the dishwasher. And because it's a chore that nobody likes to do. Not that it's a lot better chore than it was when we were kids, but we had to actually wash them instead of putting them in the dishwasher. But I try to look after that. And then it's just like, oh, that's one thing I don't have to do. And I don't tell them I do it. And I try to do it so they can't tell it's been done, so that they have this thing about, oh, I got to go do the dishwasher and then wash the dishes. And then, oh, it's done. And they're put away. Oh, that's great. And it's just all of a sudden you have 10 minutes that you can relax before you had to go do this chore. So look around and see, my son has a wood heating. He has a wood stove. So I'll go and chop some wood, and it's good exercise for me. And I'm not going to say I enjoy chopping wood, but I only do it 2 or 3 times a year. So it's not like I'm doing it every day or every week, but just look around and see things that need to be done, that are part of the normal everyday need to be done things, and then pick the ones that you don't mind doing. And they're constantly doing laundry. So I'll just go in and take everything out of the dryer, fold it. I don't do a very good job of folding it, but they come and there's this pile of half decent folded clothes, wow, it's a lot better than having to do all that folding myself. And so just how can you be of help and be of service to your family?
No, that's great advice. Now, as we wrap up this conversation, is there a favorite story that you have with Chloe or with Carson that you'd like to share?
I, I like to take them to the park, and there's swings in the park. And what popped into my head when you asked that question was, I had my I had my iPad. I was taking pictures of them on this two-person swing, so they were swinging together, and they had just their faces were so full of joy and happiness, right? And then I sent them to their mom and dad, and it's just and I just know that they were like, oh, these kids are having such a great time with grandpa. This is just, it's there. I'm sure their heart filled up, and I know my heart filled up. And it's just those simple moments that really stand out.
Oh, that's a great story and a great reminder too. And something I think that as grandfathers we don't always remember is that the simple things are sometimes not only what we remember and cherish the most, but also the grandkids. Talking with other grown adults that talk about when they were 10 years old and grandpa let them drive the farm truck,
Right, right.
or something. And for grandfather, that was probably just a nice little moment and kind of a throwaway activity. But for that 10-year-old that's now 60 years old, they
Yeah,
remember that as being like, that was a big deal. That was something that, only grandpa could give to me.
right. You're absolutely right.
Well, Scott, what's the best way if somebody wanted to connect with you? And I know I'm going to put some links to some of your websites, but if people wanted to connect with you and chat a little bit more, what's a good way for them to do that?
Probably the best way is on Facebook, which would be facebook.com/Scott A. Paton, Paton, and A is my middle initial. I was too slow. I couldn't get my full name without the middle initial in there. And then you can just send me a message there and let me know that you heard us on the show, and we can talk about whatever we want to. We talk about grandkids, I guess.
Sure. Sure. Well, thank you, Scott, and we'll be sure to put a link to that Facebook on the show notes as well. And I really
Awesome.
do appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk with us about your experience with being a grandfather.
My pleasure, Greg. I'm happy to be here, and it's the first time I've really been like, you're a grandpa, and we're talking about that instead of business or a bunch of other things, and it's just a delight.
Wow, guys, I don't know about you, but this was just another outstanding conversation. The big takeaway that I had was when we were both talking about legacy. And legacy can take on many different forms. It's not always just savings that we can pass on to our grandkids to try to give them a little bit of a leg up in the world. Legacy can take on the form of travel and exposing them to new ideas and new cultures, new thoughts, broadening out that world for them so that they have a bigger perspective in their life. Legacy can also mean being able to share with them different concepts, different ideas. And some of that's wrapped up in travel, of course, but then some of it's also being able to share with our grandchildren a love for history, of literature, of science, whatever that is, and whatever you think of legacy. Are you being purposeful in developing a plan or being mindful of being able to share that with your grandchildren? And if not, why not? It's a perfect time to start thinking about what it is that you want to be passing on. Your love for adventure, your love for books, for study, for people. What was your big takeaway from this conversation with Scott? Again, mine was legacy, but we touched on so many different aspects. A couple of things that we talked about were, coming into a relationship with a granddaughter that was already part of the package when his son got married. So there's a ton in there, and I'm curious to know what your big takeaway was. Do me a favor, reach out to me and let me know what your takeaway was, or connect with Scott on Facebook. Let him know what you got out of this conversation. Scott's a cool guy to follow. Look, guys, I hope you had a great time with this conversation, and I'm looking forward to the next one with you. Remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.